Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
The Wicomico County Council votes to ban so-called open-top DAF tanks, and it's the 150th anniversary of the Salisbury Fire Department. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. It's been a long 3 years, but after much debate, the Wicomico County Council voted 5-2 to ban the controversial tanks to hold animal slurry that is used as a soil amendment. We'll have a special interview with Councilmember Josh Hastings. And then it's the 150th anniversary of the Salisbury Fire Department. In our studio this morning is Greg Bassett, editor and general manager for the Salisbury Independent. On the phone, Susan Canfor, a reporter for Coastal Point, but also has done a piece on the Salisbury Fire Department for the Salisbury Independent. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Don.
Hi, Don.
So, Greg, I want to turn to you, and it finally, it seems as if they got it done.
On the DAF tank?
On the DAF tank.
They finally did. So the council voted Tuesday night 5-2 to ban future open-top tanks like the DAF tank. But there were lots of amendments to the legislation. First of all, the tank that's there now will stay there. So there aren't any big changes to that. That thing is grandfathered in. But certainly there's a lot of attention been placed on that thing, and maybe there's going to be some better management of it. The idea that the open top, that the contents would glaze over, and that apparently didn't happen. The formula hasn't been right with the contents that are in there. There might be some ways to solve that problem. The truck traffic will be a problem, but at least for now, it looks like there will be no more of these big giant tanks allowed anywhere in the county. Long discussion about whether these should be allowed in the industrial zone, whether they should be in the A1 agriculture zones, which are ag zones that are literally in the middle of nowhere out in the sticks. And in fact, that was one of the ideas that was promoted till the very end through some amendments to allow it in the A1 zone. Probably one of the biggest concessions was that farmers would still be able to have their small DAF tanks, not the big ones, but perhaps a 150, 200-gallon one that they keep right there on their property. But they could not use them for long-term storage, that there'd be a cap of, 6 or 8 months at a time when the stuff could be stowed. And the reason it needs to be stored is that you can't apply this stuff during freezing weather. There's only certain weeks of the spring and fall, or spring and summer, that it can be applied where it's useful on crops. The rest of the time it has to be stored and sort of ferment. They wanted the farmers to still have that advantage, but not have this big industrial tank. The argument continued on forever. Is this a waste substance, or is it a fertilizer? Is it an asset, or is it not? And there was a lot of division about that. Delmarva Chicken Association, the old Delmarva poultry industry, the lobbying group for the poultry farmers, was very opposed to this. They see it as a slippery slope, that there will be more regulations coming down the road. But in the end, I think the farmers got a victory in that they can keep their own little tanks as long as they're properly registered and the zoning's correct, without having these big 3 million gallon tanks.
Well, we talked to the Wicomico County Councilmember Josh Hastings, who, along with the Councilmember Bill McCain, sought a number of changes to the amendments banning the DAF tanks, and this is what he had to say.
The County Council has been listening for the past 3 years with a group of citizens who have been affected by a current DAF tank. So we've been trying to find the right common ground. So we've brought in, from folks from our local farm bureau, the local affected citizens, the poultry industry, and all sorts of other folks to try to find a better common ground. I do think we hit that last night in the sense that we came up with a proposal and a bill and passed it that would essentially prohibit open air tanks in the county while still leaving open the ability for individual farmers to apply DAF to their land, and while making sure that groups like Purdue, who are poultry processors, are not penalized for what they're already doing.
During the meeting, you did get some opposition or concerns, certainly from Purdue.
My name is Drew Getty. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations and Environmental Sustainability for Purdue Farms. So although our operations are not impacted by this legislation, I'm here tonight to express concern that the legislation being considered is not tailored to the issue at hand. And I would surmise that the issue at hand is the improper management of a single DAF storage tank in Wicomico County. However, the legislation does nothing to address the management of this tank, as its use is grandfathered in. Instead of addressing the issue, the council's taken the opportunity to shift the focus to animal waste and to agriculture.
I think Purdue is, of course, trying to speak up for the larger poultry industry. But I think once they look at the finally, what we actually passed, I think they'll be very pleased with it and actually very happy with what we put together.
And of course, the Delmarva Chicken Association again expressed its opposition.
Good evening. My name is Holly Porter. I'm the Executive Director of the Delmarva Chicken Association. We ask the Council to reconsider the proposal of allowing this structure in A1 with the special exceptions and even with the restrictions, while some of those were not quite science-based. There is a better way for this Council to support all citizens of this county, including those in agriculture.
Yeah, the Delmarva Chicken Association did come out against what we were doing, but it was more at a broad level. I think once they looked at the actual amendments, this would still allow DAF to come into the county through an anaerobic digestion, a closed system, but it's still that what the county council worked very hard and actually did achieve was the ability to be able to address the issue in open tanks, the kind of effects that the citizens were really concerned about, which of course was the smell, the truck traffic, these other kind of things. And so I think that we got after the vote, we did hear a lot of citizens came out and said they were very happy about the way it came about. But I think the poultry industry was speaking up more on the broad level. I think with the amendments that we introduced, we were able to, of course, address a lot of their concerns without, without dampening any kind of future efforts that they were concerned about.
I know that the president of the council, John Kennedy, said earlier, expressed his concern and opposition. In part, he thought that you could place these open top tanks at least somewhere where they would not be impacting, for instance, local residents. Why didn't that work out for you?
Yeah, I'll say this. I personally, as council member, I worked with Department of Planning with our local planning clerks on staff to try to map out at a parcel level exactly where these tanks could go, and what would be the least intrusive way to make that happen. At the end of the day, what became the most clear was essentially, we're very limited on any kind of place in the county. Wycomico County is 106,000 population or growing. It's very hard to do that in a way in an agricultural AR district, an agricultural district. It's very hard to do that in a way that doesn't impact neighbors. So we think the best way to go about that was to still allow it, but to do it through a closed system. Anaerobic digestion is probably a better approach.
Now, this still leaves, as I understand it, the tank that is near Hebron and Mardella Springs in operation. What do you tell the people there? I mean, obviously the residents were certainly pushing to have these tanks dealt with, but their own tank, I am assuming, will still be there? Yeah,
the county council, all we can do is be forward-looking. So as we noted that, this is perspective. This is a forward-looking bill. So this is basically just regulates anything coming forward in the future. So this will not directly impact the current tanks. They will just be a non-conforming use in our zoning.
Finally, do you get any sense about the urgency of developing these tanks on site here in Wycomico County, or for that matter, anywhere? That this was some kind of need by the poultry industry to have these kinds of tanks out there? I mean, what sense do you get about why such a push?
Well, as one farmer put it, he came out, he said, some farmers started applying DAF in the 1980s here in the county. He said there's been, no push whatsoever to try to, there's been no issues with trying to get DAF into the county before the current issues with the current tank. So, I think overall this is the trend of a large tank and open air system and the products going into that tank. That is very much an antiquated system, and I don't think that it's going to be as much of an issue. I think industry has already, the poultry industry has already reached out to us, and they said that they are looking at innovative and better ways to take this product, which many people refer to as a waste product, and to better apply it, to put it into composting and anaerobic digestion, that kind of work, so that the nutrients are captured, so that the gases are captured and then used for biogas or other kind of ways. So, in my view, and what we've seen so far in the county, it doesn't appear that the open air tanks are the future. if anything, it's an antiquated system. So I don't think there's going to be as much pressure to have those. But at least here in the county, we've gone through our right steps to try to make sure that the folks who live especially in the agricultural districts, which is a considerable amount of the county, the vast majority of the county, that those residents are protected from the smells and the issues that have arisen from the more recent tank that has been put in the county.
And that was Wicomico County Council Member Josh Hastings. I want to turn to you, Greg, because one of the things that caught my ear was with Purdue Farms. They seem to go even a bit further, and I didn't include it in the soundbite because I wanted to sort of keep that in terms of integrity for the sound cut. But they went on to say that this was an unnecessary attack on agriculture. Now, they don't have really a dog in this hunt because they send their stuff out and deal with it in another way. Did that surprise you?
Well, first, Don, I got to say, great reporting. Those were perfect questions to ask Josh, and he really, you guys were able to summarize the issue way better than I did in the opening. I mean, that really got to the nut of what's going on. So that great reporting on your part, great questions. But yeah, Purdue does do a different process. They do it up in Seaford, and they convert their slurry, the stuff that ends up on the floor in the slaughterhouses, into a product that becomes fertilizer for people's yards, for grass and stuff. So they have a different process. It's probably more expensive, but they're willing to bear that burden to not have the attention. But at the same time, they're defending their brethren in the industry that all of them have the right should have the right to do this, and who knows what Purdue's going to need to do in the future. The biggest thing with this, as we go forward now, is that whenever a locality bans something ahead of the state now is going to start to pay attention and go, wait, what do they ban? Why didn't we ban it? If it's so bad, maybe we need to ban it. So when the state would act on it, they would not get down to the nitty-gritty about where these things could be located. That would be a local decision. But the state could possibly ban the process. So that whole distilled aeration flotation process could be banned statewide in Maryland. So that would not be allowed. And as you heard Josh say, there's more technologies coming down that will perhaps make this an obsolete method. John Cannon, in his closing remarks on this, was hopeful that the county would not have to revisit the issue again because there would be a new, safer, cleaner, capped method without the smell. But we don't know that it's going to happen. So the next thing is going to go to the state level, and then so the Farm Bureau here is against the big tank in Mardella-Hebron. Are they going to be against banning of the actual process and go to Annapolis and fight that? So they might look hypocritical to some lawmakers on that because they don't want it in their backyard, but they're in favor of the process. So this isn't going to go away as a state issue. This is going to, I think, come up in the legislature. But you're right. Purdue is just defending the brethren as they should, because that's what they do. And hats off to Purdue for managing this process in a way that does not cause the same neighborhood problem.
I mean, and it's also very clearly that we're talking about storage, that they, in the debate, said, look, when it comes to the use in terms of spreading this on this fields, that kind of thing, that's a state issue.
That's a completely state environmental issue. Yes, it is.
So, Susan, I want to turn to you because we got the 150th anniversary of the founding of the Salisbury Fire Department, and as I understand it, funds were actually first raised by public subscription in 1872 and included a small hand engine. Tell us a little history here.
Well, I think Greg has more history than I have, but I will say that one of the firefighters who's been in the fire company 44 years, Brian Records, has written a book about the history of the fire department, and it will be available at the end of this year. It is going to cost $39, and the title is 150 Years of Service and Tradition. And I guess he's the kind of the official or maybe unofficial historian for the fire department, and he's kept, written about these fires and many of the distinguished men and women who have been in the fire service for years and years. He has a lot of stories and backstories, pictures of huge rolling orange flames, coming out of fires and smoke, and firefighters in the old days with horses and carriages. And it's just going to be a big coffee table book that should cover the entire history, very interesting history of the 150th anniversary of the fire department. On October 22nd at 10 o'clock, there's going to be a parade to celebrate the fire department's 150th anniversary. And it will start on Main Street near Royal Farms, and it will end at the Cypress Street Station 16. And Mr. Records told me that there's going to be Sparky the Fire Dog will be there, and there are going to be live rescue and rappelling demonstrations. Government officials will have proclamations and commendations, and there will be fire apparatus, including antique fire cars. The antique chief's car from the Fruitland Fire Department will be there, and other antique equipment. So it should be a big event, and these distinguished men and women are certainly looking forward to it. They're all excited about celebrating their 150th anniversary. Should be a great event.
So, what did he tell you about his fire department and some of what he was looking at?
I also talked to Deputy Chief Darren Scott.
Mm-hmm.
He's been with the fire department 37 years, and his comment was that having the 150th anniversary is absolutely great. He said we've been here since 1872. It started with one bay. The fire department started with one bay downtown. He said it was where the downtown plaza is now, facing Route 50, that side of the downtown plaza. Then a second firehouse was built in 1930, and Mr. Records said Mr. Records described that when it was built, he said, because of local affluent businessmen and as a result of several disastrous fires in the industrial mills on the city's east side. So the new station was built, and Mr. Scott said they could actually use a fourth station now because they've had so many calls. The fire department is so busy, the average person probably wouldn't think of how busy it is, but they have 111 career personnel, 46 volunteers, and they cover 48 square miles. In 2021, which was last year, they responded to more than 3,800 fires and 11,000 EMS calls. So the EMS calls are certainly more than the fire calls, and they respond to them constantly, all day long, every day. The growth, Mr. Records said the growth is just incredible, and it's continuing to grow. So they're very excited about it. There's a lot of really interesting history, and probably Greg knows more about the history of it than I do. He's been in Salisbury a lot longer. But judging from the pictures and the excerpts that I saw from the book, it looks like a wonderful event.
Greg, the issue of financing the fire department came up at the recent county executive debate. Where are we in terms of financing the fire department?
Yeah, it's a really interesting future that as a county we're all going to have to look at. So when you look at the Salisbury Fire Department, it was really a transformational organization at the time. When you think about it, back then, at least around here, there were no paid fire departments at all. Everything was volunteer. Salisbury burned down twice. The entire city burned down twice, and they realized, okay, we maybe need to staff some guys with a fire truck. Now, fire trucks weren't then what they are now, but the standpipe was built downtown to hold water, to have fire hydrants, which was very innovative in its time in the early 1910s. And the idea that you'd have a paid staff, and it wasn't a lot of guys, but you'd have paid people there to answer the call to at least make one incursion into a fire was a big deal. One of the things that gets me, and I get choked up easily, but I really choke up over at the courthouse. And if you haven't seen it, you should go look at it. There's a big plaque where when the first time Salisbury burned down, word spread that the city was on fire. They put fire trucks, fire wagons, onto freight trains, drove the trains from Seaford and Accomack County, north and south, to Salisbury, unloaded them so that volunteers from other jurisdictions could help fight the fire. And just the idea that they went to all that trouble, that they did that rather than have horses drag the fire wagons that far, it's just amazing to me. So it's a plaque that salutes these other towns for helping save Salisbury. So Salisbury has a long history of a paid fire department. Other volunteer departments used to mock Salisbury. Well, would it be nice if we could have a paid department? But as you see things changing in this world, with this insurance world where we need fire protection all the time, many municipalities have moved to paid. Ocean City, which was like the last great totally volunteer huge fire company, they are a mostly paid organization with volunteers backing them up. We saw this with EMS people. The old ambulance driver philosophy was someone's hurt, you throw them in the back of the ambulance, you drive as fast as you can to Salisbury. So it wasn't about saving their lives, it was getting them to a doctor as fast as you can. Now, once the TV show Emergency came out, we all saw that, okay, wait, we can train these people to be paramedics and be sort of doctors on the scene to get these people stable before they take the transport to the hospital. That was all innovative. Salisbury was the first community in this region to do any of that. So that they want to pat themselves on the back here for their anniversary is a big deal because they've made a huge contribution. Now, to answer your question, after I've gone through all that throat clearing, to answer your question, it's a problem going forward. So the volunteer ranks are shrinking in these outer towns. There's more pressure to hire people. They're now hiring some EMS. They have to, have bake sales and do things to dinners to raise money to fund these things in the local municipalities. The county does provide some funding for the local places, but it came out in the debate that we're going to have to do something about fire service and emergency service countywide. And do you create a countywide department somehow to pay this? Do you just keep writing checks to the Sharptowns and Willards and Hebrons of the world? What are we going to do to solve this problem? Because it's going to continue to be a big problem. We've made a lot of progress just in the last 10 years with a fire services agreement. As Susan said, the calls are escalating. The city of Salisbury does operate outside the city limits. There's a formula that the county writes them a check to help pay for the calls that they answer from outside. But this is going to be a countywide problem. And just like with the county sheriff's office, they're going to be policing the entire county. We're going to have to do something about fire services and emergency medical service for the entire county.
At one point, by the way, there was a secession by one of the volunteer firefighter groups. Tell me a little bit about that, because it resulted actually in this sort of standoff with Mayor Jake Day.
Well, there's been a couple of those. About 25 years ago, there was a mutiny out at Station 2 up on Brown Street. That was one of those sort of a command, whoever was in charge of the local volunteers. There was just a leadership thing in there that helped drive that. That was resolved. They've built a brand new Station 2 out there. It's just a beautiful facility. The problem at Station 1 was the volunteers, the city has very strict rules on what volunteers have to be able to do. The city has to be able to respond to a fire within 9 minutes or 6 minutes. I guess it's 9 minutes. So the volunteer has to be there and be on the truck and be at the scene fast. And volunteers have not been as reliable for that. And there's a lot of training rules where there were some volunteers who weren't able to qualify in terms of the training. And the time commitment and the 24-hour staffing. They also felt like that they were being perhaps used by the paid guys, that the grunt work was being done by the volunteers while the paid guys got to do the easy work. There was some of that tension that was going on. So what they tried to do, some of the volunteers at Station 1 tried to leave and create their own volunteer fire company that would serve the eastern side of Salisbury in the county area. And they were not able to get their designation. They raised some money. There was some lawsuits back and forth. The city was not cooperative in this at all. They felt like these guys were not qualified. Just because if you're not good enough to work for us, that doesn't mean you can go out and create your own somewhere. They would have been providing fire protection for that area that included the airport and Warwick Community College. So the city was very concerned about that. So that sort of died. It didn't get anywhere. It was awkward for me because, of course, they were named the Salisbury Independent Fire Company, so everyone thought that I had gone out and started a fire company instead of a newspaper. So that was awkward. I was getting their mail; they were getting my mail. But anyway, it did resolve itself, and the city prevailed on that.
By the way, I also want to follow up here briefly with you, Greg. We got the third and final phase of the Salisbury Skate Park that's under construction. Debbie Sam, I guess, the former city's grants manager, acquired, over $500,000. Tell me a little bit about how that's going.
Yeah, one of the themes in my history, my profession, is that I'm wrong about everything, and this is one of those things. When it started, I was like, they'll never build a skate park there. That's not going to work. Nobody's going to go there. This thing's been a tremendous success. They've raised tons of money. They've been able to get money for grants. There's been a great vision for this. Debbie Stam, who's the former purchasing officer for the city, she believed in this. She advocated for it through different administrations. She was able to find money for it. They put a little plaque up to her, which is just like great tribute to someone who worked tirelessly to the city with absolutely no credit at all for years. It's just great that they recognized her. But yes, it's a tremendous success. Phase 3 is starting. It's fun out there. It's busy. Last time I was there were actually neighbors, people from the neighborhood who came over and they were watching the kids. And they're not all kids. Some of them are guys out there my age who are on a skateboard, which I would not recommend anyone my age. But anyway, they're out there having a great time. And it's just been a tremendous asset to that Salisbury City Park footprint.
So, well, what does it look like visually?
It's like there's like big bounds, and it's paved. And I don't understand the tricks or what they're called, but you can go fast, you can go slow. There's bowls, there's loops, there's humps, there's all kinds of things. And these guys certainly have an imagination for how they're going to use it. It's more I think it seems more friendly than the one in Ocean City, which is like a big bowl, the one that they have down there. This looks more rural looking, more touring looking. I don't know how to describe it. It's more open, but still you've got to pad up and wear your helmets and all that. It just looks like a lot of fun.
So a few minutes left. We got this election coming up pretty soon. How do you read what looks like in the last month here of this particular Wicomico County executive?
Yeah, I'm still in therapy from the county executive debate the other night. A very interesting debate. I guess I watched it 3 or 4 times now because I had to write the story from it, and I want to make sure that my quotes were exactly right. But there was some interesting things at the time. I think we talked about this on the show before. I was more alarmed by the kind of the misinformation that the candidates were announcing, that they didn't understand some of the processes. But when I watched it again with the idea of how are these candidates different than each other, and they really did show some distinguishing philosophies, how they're going to go forward. And you saw Julie Giordano. She keyed everything based on leadership. Ernie Davis was more nuts and bolts in terms of like a few issues that are important to him. Miraboda seemed to be floating lots of different issues in kind of random ways, I thought. And then at the end of the debate, he sort of explained that. They said, a third-party candidate, he's a libertarian candidate. Third-party candidates historically don't do well. What's your path to be elected? And he sort of made it clear that he's there to present some ideas, to get some ideas off his chest that maybe he doesn't expect to win. But he wants to talk about some of these things. And one of them was the fire service thing. It made me think again about that. They're all aligned on important issues like the sewer going forward, that it's needed, and how that's going to be enacted, who's going to pay for it. That'll be, rubber hitting the road type stuff. But they really did show some differences. We've got a county council debate coming up soon. I'll be interviewing people on the PAC-14 TV show, all the candidates. So we'll see where they differ on some issues. There's some really talented candidates out there. And then the school board thing is its own separate thing. All kinds of interesting areas to discuss school board, because you see this stuff where parents don't feel like they're involved enough, and that there's a bureaucratic situation with the Board of Education and they want to penetrate those walls. You see that the meetings have become battle zones, so we're going to have to quiz the candidates on how they feel about that. It's going to be a fun, 5 weeks till early voting starts.
Because one of the things, as a matter of fact, that struck me with Giordano's, I think it was an opening statement or a closing statement, of which that she came really hard down on the idea of education and parental involvement. As a matter of fact, I asked her about that some time back, and she seemed to indicate that she would certainly have a strong voice, although it was not clear to me as to exactly how she would manifest what she wants to see anyway in the Board of Education.
Yeah, and it might be one of those things where I just don't get it. When these parents say they don't have a voice in their schools, I felt like I had a voice in my kids' education. They were public school trained. I was in public schools. I felt like my parents could come and talk. Now, that's ancient history, and maybe even with my own kids, it's ancient history. But I felt like we had a role. But at the same time, you have to trust the establishment to a degree, because they're the experts. They see things in theory in a non-emotional way, and they know how curriculums are supposed to work. I did like what she said, that we want to teach kids how to think, not what to think. I'm not sure what that means exactly. I mean, I know what it should mean, but I'm not sure what it really means. I felt like I was taught to think. I feel like my kids were. But we also need to know what to think in terms of fact-based thinking, and that's some of the issues. It just in terms of the parental involvement. I thought security would be more of the issue, but the parental involvement thing is going on because parents, for whatever reason, don't feel like that they're not being heard. Enough parents feel like that, and they're going to the school boards and they're acting very often in very impolite ways to try to get their viewpoints out. And there's a lot of concern whether that's good or bad.
Is this perhaps more ideological, do you think, in terms of what they're saying? I've seen some of the material from some of the folks who are highly critical of the board, and so a lot of it seems much more platitudinous, I guess, for lack of a better word, socialism and so on and so forth, rather than getting at the nuts and bolts of, hey, my kid's not learning.
Yeah, I think maybe, I think it's across all levels. There's just some people have problems with authority. I mean, you would think that historically it would be people from the left would have more problems with the authority than people from the right. You see that a lot of these people are from the right, but really it's about the kids. I think it transcends politics. But certainly it's a concern. The masks thing exasperated all that stuff. The remote teaching exasperated. It just the problems with teachers becoming more professional and us recognizing that it's not just a situation where I love teaching, therefore I'm going to be a teacher and I don't care how much I get paid, which is a point that Julie Giordano made for her own professional history. But there are a lot of teachers who don't feel that way, that compensation is very important to them. And the rationalization that we've done for years, like, well, they get 3 months off. What do they expect? It's not like that anymore. Being a teacher is not what it was in our day. It's a really, really complicated process. There's so much more for kids to learn. And the way that the society is with all this immediate gratification, with all the electronic devices and stuff, the way to teach now is not by rote, and repetition that we went through. You really need new and better skills to be a teacher.
We were speaking with Greg Bassett. He's editor and general manager for the Salisbury Independent. Also on the phone with us is Susan Canfor. She's a reporter for the Coastal Point, but also did a piece for the Salisbury Independent on the Salisbury Fire Department's 150th anniversary. Appreciate both of you stopping by and chatting with us this morning.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome. Thank you, Don.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.